Welcome to Embedded. I am Elecia White alongside Christopher White. Our guest this week is Lee Wilkins, and we're going to talk about art and open source hardware and teaching, learning, writing, open source hardware summit, and or being a cyborg.
Hi, Lee. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Could you tell us about yourself as if we met next weekend at the Open Hardware Summit?
Well, I am an artist primarily. I do a lot of work with technology and exploring different ways technology can exist in the world. And I'm also a really big community advocate and, just like general community person. I'm really excited about bringing people together and making weird stuff.
Cool. We want to do lightning round where we ask you short questions. And if we're behaving ourselves, we won't then ask why and how and all the other details until later. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is a cyborg?
A cyborg is any time humans and technology come together.
What senses do you wish you had?
I don't know. I have no answer for that question. There's no specific senses I wish I had. I am very content with my set of senses.
Cool.
Favorite fictional cyborg?
I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately, so I have to go with 7 of 9.
Oh. Favorite fictional space station?
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know. They're all kind of bad. Like a lot of bad or weird things happen on fictional space stations. I can't say that I want to be on any of them.
Do you like to complete one project or start a dozen?
Definitely start a dozen.
Do you have a favorite Lagrange point?
Yeah, L4. I'm all about L4.
Is that a stable one? I can never remember.
It is.
Okay. Favorite fictional robot, if we're not going to do space stations?
Oh, I don't know if I have one of those either. I don't know. I'm truly not a big media person. I don't consume a whole ton of media.
If you could teach a college course, what would you teach?
Well, I, up until recently, have been teaching a college course, a university course, and it's called Cybernetics and Body-Centric Technology.
Okay, we'll have to ask more about that.
Yeah, that one just leads to a lot of other questions, doesn't it?
Do you have a tip everyone should know?
Keep it weird.
All right. That sounds like a tip, a t-shirt, a bumper sticker, and a general philosophy of life.
It is, yeah.
So coming up very shortly, there is the Open Source Hardware Summit, or is it the Open Hardware Summit? How many sources need to be in there?
The Open Hardware Summit.
And you're the chair of that.
I am, yeah. I am extremely excited about this year's event.
It's in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
Did you did you have a hand in that? You're based in Canada, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm based in Montreal. So we have been, a combination of being virtual and being in New York for the last many years. We're trying to take a couple of steps just to be a little bit more global and just expand our reach a little bit. So Canada seemed like a good, easy step, and I'm pretty involved in the community here. So it seemed like a great location for us.
And let's just make sure we get the dates right. When is it?
It's May 3rd and 4th.
Okay, so right after the show goes up, this is 2024, if anybody's listening to it later. And what are you most excited about?
I'm the primary organizer. I do all of the logistics. I do all of like the human wrangling and stuff. And I am honestly most excited to have people in the same room and what some people call hallway con, which is not any of the specific things, but just like chatting with people in between sessions or like, when you're going out to grab a coffee or something like that, like being with the community. I feel like there recently has been, just a lot of divide in the places people are hanging out on the internet, and just to like get a chance to chat with people about stuff they're curious about. I am unbelievably excited for that.
Have you been going to a lot of in-person conferences lately?
I haven't. I still feel like, we're coming out of this kind of weird state where people for a long time were unsure of how to gather. So I think there's still a lot of momentum of people being really excited to be in the same room together. So I haven't personally been going to that many conferences, which is another reason why I'm so excited.
Any talks that stand out that you are encouraging people to see live?
Yeah, so I'm extremely excited about our keynote speaker, Danielle Boyer, who is an Indigenous roboticist, and she's using robots for Indigenous language revival. So that is super exciting to me. I love, first of all, just like she has this like cool aesthetic that she brings to robotics that I think like gets a lot of like young people and kids really like interested and curious, and also just applications that we often don't see discussed when we talk about robotics. You know, we see a lot of like super important and amazing, you know, like science or industry or like all kinds of different other applications like that. But I haven't seen that many companion bots used for language revival before. So I really love that creative application.
So she's using the robots to help folks learn some of the Indigenous languages.
Yes, exactly.
That's a neat application.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like she also teaches, you know, at the same time, like people how to like 3D print and, you know, stuff about STEM. So it's really like a whole bunch of different skills coming together.
Okay, so what else should I make sure to be there for?
Well, we have also a whole bunch of workshops on day 2, which is really exciting because last year people couldn't decide whether they wanted to go to talks or they wanted to go to workshops. So we're like, okay, no problem. We'll just make it 2 different days and now you don't have to choose. So it's just really, you know, you see people post on the internet or you maybe hear something that someone's working on a podcast, but it's not the same as like actually getting to like touch it and see it and do it for yourself. So we have a bunch of workshops on day 2 that I am really excited about.
And when I say be there, I won't be there. But you've always had a really good history of having a hybrid conference and being available to those of us who aren't in the co-located spaces. How is that working this year?
Yeah, so we really just want to be able to include as many people as possible. That's always the goal. And this year, we first have all of the talks streamed, you know, all of the access to all of our like, you know, stage talks will always be free and accessible on YouTube. So you can check that out either live as it's happening or all of the talks from previous years are also available. And on day 2, we have a unconference. So we are going to be hosting unconference sessions, which basically means that anyone can propose an idea that they want to talk about. It can be about like building community strategies. It can be about like something super technical or like using a certain software or trying to iterate on a certain project. It could be really anything that you want to talk about. You can propose it on our Discord and then we vote on, I think we have about 10 slots. So we schedule unconference sessions throughout the day and people can pop in virtually and just like have these discussions with people. We have 2 different time zones. We have one time zone that will be better for people in Asia, and we have one time zone that's going to be better for people in the Americas. So hopefully between those 2 time zones, you can find something all around the world that's going to be able to fit you. And yeah, I have no idea what people are going to propose, and I'm excited to see what people want to chat about.
Has that been done before at the open source conference?
Well, last year we had about an hour on one of the days in person where we decided to have an unconference session, and people were just so excited to chat that we were supposed to have 2 sessions, but we literally couldn't stop people from talking to move them into another room. We were like, okay, guys, it's time for the second session. And they just wouldn't move. So we're like, okay, clearly people want this. So we're also going to have some in person, but like, why not extend it online, right? We have part of our goal with the summit is to be more global. So, you know, why not utilize all of our capabilities to reach people virtually? And people virtually don't have to be like only consuming the content too, right? Like you can say, I'm going to attend the conference and you're like watching YouTube while you're doing your own thing. But like we really wanted our virtual participants to like actually get to participate.
And there's the Discord. So it's not like you're just watching YouTube and not participating.
Yeah.
You can talk.
Yeah, exactly. And anyone can join the OSHWA Discord. And, you know, there's discussions that happen year round. It's not just around the summit. You know, of course, we're doing a lot to make the summit really awesome. But there's also, you know, if you have like a hardware question, if you have a question about open source, if you just like want to find someone who's like interested in the same things, you can always post in the Discord and find like-minded people.
So Open Source Hardware Association. Is that right?
Yes.
Open Source Hardware Association, OSHWA. Mm-hmm. When I first came across them, they seemed like an organization that was mostly about certifying boards to be open source and talking about how you open source boards, which is more than just putting a schematic up. It's also about the BOM and the layout and all of that. But it seems like OSHWA has gone in a different direction. Is that just kind of my perception, or what's up with OSHWA lately?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like the main thing we really do is certify projects. And one thing that I think is really important, while the absolute majority of the things that we certify are PCBs and boards and projects like that, any physical matter can be open source hardware. And I think that some of the concerns that we have with open source hardware are relatable to many other types of like products or objects that people are creating, right? Like how can we open source things in general? But you know, there's obviously and traditionally has been a focus on like electronics and hardware. So we are, you know, when you say a different direction, I'm kind of curious what kind of tips you off to that, because we're just trying to expand our community and kind of like try to get new people involved while encouraging them and letting them know that like you don't have to have a fully certified 100% open source pure product or project in order to be a part of our community, right? There are definitely barriers. There's reasons why people are not there yet. We're here to help people at like any point they are in that process of learning or figuring it out, or even like whether it's like figuring out how to like logistically share your project, or whether you're figuring out, you know, like what kind of license you should use, or like what does it really mean to open source your project and why you should care. So, you know, we're generally just trying to create a more broad stance and try to welcome new people in.
I guess that actually was one of the things that's different. I mean, not different. It was always welcoming, but meeting people where they are, the learning aspect. I mean, that's OSHWA, when it started, felt, I don't want to make a big division between professional and maker, but there is a bit of a division.
Yeah.
And OSHWA has been more in the maker community, but it's also been more in the academic community and a little less present in the professional community. But again, my perceptions are what I read on the internet, and my slice of the internet is very small because I don't like the rest of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we always try to bridge all of these different communities as much as possible because we're really facing very similar types of challenges, right? So some of this has to do with like past chairs and past organizers who have, you know, put their hand in the community in a very particular way. So, you know, if there is like a chair of the summit who is really into academia or really into industry or really into like the maker community, of course, you're going to be able to like see that a little bit in like the events of the summit and just generally the people who are congregating around OSHWA. But in general, we have always been welcoming to all of those groups and like the unique perspective that they can all bring, because it's really through talking together and like overcoming these issues together that we will be able to really make open source hardware like a mainstream and normal thing.
And you said it wasn't just electronics. You wanted everything to be open source. Like, Like Thingiverse?
Or at least open sourceable.
Yeah. I mean, that's the dream, right? Like we shouldn't be making information and access to tools and access to equipment artificially scarce when it doesn't need to be, right? And the electronics community, starting with the open source software community, this is something that we already have a lot of momentum for. We already have some ideas around, and it makes it a really great place to start and a really great place to explore. But when you look at all kinds of different technology, like our textiles technology, we have a workshop this year at the summit about making paper, and paper is definitely a technology, so what stops that process from being open source versus, how to make a sensor or how to make, a microcontroller or something like that.
What are the challenges? So, I mean, from a software perspective, open source has been a thing for quite a long time. GNU has existed for a long time, and there's, various licenses that can be open source, and people kind of understand that as a concept. And it doesn't seem like it's a huge step to go to PCBs. They have artifacts that are basically software, and we can put a license on them. What gets challenging when you move past that?
Yeah, for sure. So there is a whole other aspect of hardware that kind of has to do with the physical fabrication of something.
Okay.
So for example, you can post an STL file, which is a rendered 3D file, right? But you're not really open sourcing it just because someone can print it. How did you make that file? How did you get there? And what is it about that is your creation? Is it the mechanism? Is it the physical aesthetic design? Is it, the process used to create it? There are a bunch of different dimensions that kind of come into focus when you're making something in the real world, and you want to be able to make it reproducible, and you want to be able to make it identifiable, and you want to be able to make it clear. There aren't that many tools that exist for easily documenting those processes. For example, GitHub is great for documenting your code, right? You can upload your code, you can see the code that is there. But what about every kind of thing that you could make is going to use a whole bunch of different kinds of files. It's going to have a whole bunch of different assembly steps. It's going to have schematics. It's going to have instructions. It's going to have tutorials and pictures and all kinds of different things. So a huge part of the community as well is trying to figure out how you could make something reproducible and how you can document it in an effective way.
So there's Hackaday and Hackster and Instructables.
Yeah, but those aren't formal. Those are just places, right?
Yeah. What is there?
Yeah, I mean, those are some great examples of places that people document things. And I think it's an ongoing negotiation. A lot of people have been documenting things in different ways, through YouTube videos, through GitHub, through Hackaday, through Hackster, through all of these different things, through sharing things on forums, through making extensive PDFs. I think it's a problem that people in our community are trying to tackle. And another thing that they're trying to focus on is just realizing who is your audience for creating all of this documentation, right? So there's no way that I can create some kind of advanced sensing mechanism and also expect anyone off the street to be able to make it, right? That's just simply unrealistic, right? So trying to figure out who is supposed to be making it, and do they have the information that they need to make it, and where does the information kind of begin and end?
Does OSHWA have guidance for where to go?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have checklists based on your project, but again, it really just so much depends what exactly your project is. But we, in order to have your project certified, you're going to have not only the output files, but also all of the files that someone would need to actually produce that. So if you have a PCB, do you have the KiCad files? Do you have not just the output, but the actual tools that you need, the source? You have to open the source for it to be open source.
And that's for 3D printing, you were mentioning STL files, which you can re-import and kind of manipulate, but it's not as nice if you had as if you had the original kind of project file.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's hard too, because again, going back to software, there's a lot of open source software production tools. the compilers and everything, mostly people use open source stuff. Even IDEs are open source, a lot of them. But that's not true of a lot of physical making things, right?
Yeah, Lee mentioned KiCad,
Yeah, right.
That's open source itself.
Right, and that's a newish development in the history of PCB design, even though it's not new. But right, AutoCAD, Fusion 360, all these things for CAD and there's plenty of open source CAD things too. But there's just a huge family, and they all have different formats.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the discussion as well. Like people are going to have various stances on if you use like a proprietary software to produce your PCB, is it still open source?
Right.
Can someone, like if they actually can't access it without having access to this like super expensive software, like should that be considered open source? And I think it's a really, really complicated question. Of course, I would love to say in a perfect world, everything would be able to be producible with only free software and only open source software. But there are obvious challenges to that.
I get frustrated with the all open all the time stance because that's not possible yet. And that means you're discouraging people who might be able to go part of the way. And I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right there with you, like you have to create like a big tent and invite people in. And some of the problems and barriers to creating open source work in general are like, we live in a society that has money and it's hard. There are definitely ways, there are absolutely open source businesses that are completely 100% viable, but we have to find ways to help people get there and help people create those businesses and, really meet people where they are at. If they're excited about the idea, that's great. Some of the stuff is like, we got to work together and just, getting on people's case for using maybe the software they were taught in school or the software they have access to because of their job, like it's definitely a step and we're all in it together.
So back to the hardware summit and specifically because I do a lot of origami, making paper. Tell me about this. Tell me all about this.
Right. I mean, I'm not really sure where exactly to begin, but we actually have 2 workshops about paper-oriented things this year. So one of them is making like an open source philosophy to making paper that just involves using like the free materials around you and like reimagining what it's like to make paper in our world and also building your own tools to make paper. Our facilitator 3D prints a bunch of different paper making tools and tells people how they can create their own. And then we have another one that's actually about origami, and it's about collaboratively creating an interactive instrument that everyone is going to get to play together through building an origami sculpture. So I'm not fully sure what that's going to be like, but I am very excited to see it.
These are workshops. Are they going to be on video? Can I participate or just watch?
Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to stream the workshops just because it's probably going to be extremely chaotic. In the best possible news, we have more people who want to be present in the workshop than we are able to have physically do the workshop. So we're not really going to be able to mic people. Everyone's going to be running around. But we will have documentation available so that people can, on their own, do the workshop. But unfortunately, we won't be able to stream them live.
I'm shaking my tiny fist. My inability to get to Montreal by Saturday. And how did you get involved with OSHWA? What drew you to the organization?
Yeah, I've been working in creative spaces for quite a while. So like DIY spaces and community-oriented spaces, and just generally using technology as like a way to connect with people and a way to have common interests and a way to like learn. So I have a nonprofit called Little Data, and we do a bunch of weird tech events, usually that overlap with art. So basically trying to like bring people together who are maybe doing more technical work with people who are doing creative work. Again, like bringing people in who are just like curious. So we did like festivals and artworks and that kind of stuff. And then I started to be involved with makerspaces in Toronto. So I was a director at a makerspace in Toronto, Site 3 Collaboratory, for a number of years, where, again, more of the same, just like helping people come together and build things and learn things and just like get excited about technology. And then I was just kind of looking for another way to make a bigger impact. And I really just love the philosophies behind open source hardware, and kind of realized that that is what I had been doing, but not really calling it that. So I, was really excited about sharing things. I used my like Twitter and Instagram and all that to just share what I was doing, what I was making, and also my process as an artist. So I have a fine arts background. I'm not an engineer or a technical person in any way. So just like sharing my learning process. And I realized basically what I was doing was open source hardware. So when I saw that they were looking for a summit chair, I was like, feel like a combination of my love for like community and hardware and just like connecting people could be really fun. And I started doing it in 2021. So we did one virtual conference, and then the last year's in New York. And this will be the third Open Hardware Summit that I'm chairing. And yeah, that brings us up to date.
So artist background and open hardware has been in the past, again, this is me trying to visualize the organization, has been more engineering oriented. And you also have been an educator and a maker. Which of these groups should attend the summit? I mean, obviously all of them.
All of these groups. I think the more cross-pollination there is, and the more like exposure that all of these groups have to each other, the more we can realize what we all have to offer, right? So I know a lot of HCI, human computer interaction folks in academia, for example, who really also walk this line. A lot of labs that exist in that space do have people with these like hugely varying backgrounds, and they produce really interesting work. So, that was some of my early inspiration, is looking at some of these creative spaces, like the most well-known example probably being like the MIT Media Lab, right? But there are a ton of labs that are like this, that are producing work that is kind of like on the cusp of engineering and art. So I feel like there's also a lot to offer for all of these groups to come together and just like chatting. And I know that there are collaborations that have come out of the summit, like unexpected people meeting each other that otherwise would not have the opportunity to realize that they're really excited about the same thing, maybe even from a totally different perspective.
It's on a weekend though, which means, I've had this mental switch that if it's on a weekday, then it's a professional conference. If it's on a weekend, it's a maker conference.
Well, it is a Friday and a Saturday, so we got both. But a lot of people in these communities who really, really care in like a deep way, the boundaries are really, really blurry, and they're super blurry for me too, right? Like I don't know where my professional and personal and artistic interests begin and end with this stuff. I think I'm just generally excited, and it like bleeds into every aspect of the things I'm doing.
I will say that I'm excited to see Ashwa working more with the academic community. If they have the tools to make things reproducible, if they know the steps, a lot of times they have the impetus to do it, and I don't want to say funding, let's go with grad students to make it happen. And it's an area where there is a lot of research and a lot of interesting things can happen there. But so many times there are academic papers and you can't reproduce them because you can't get to the code. And it's not because the lead investigator doesn't want you to have the code. It's just there's no good way to put it together.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I have spent a lot of time being the oddball in academic circles, like pushing against these boundaries. And it's so hard. But Oshawa just recently ran a program, Open Hardware Creators in Academia, that's kind of like meant to address some of these issues. So we gave grants to, I want to say, 10 fellows to do kind of meta work on creating open source hardware in academia. So creating guides to like how you can like teach these things to your students, how you can present it to the administration, and just general resources for navigating this, because, you know, there are structures in place that really, really prevent it. And that's part of our work as a community to try to overcome those things.
I mean, one question there too is going back to, using what tools you had in college. The companies have an interest in getting people hooked on SolidWorks or whatever, right? And so,
for sure.
So those are the tools you encounter in academia, because those are the professional tools, and they're preparing you for professional work. But also the companies, give the academics, the academia organizations a deal, so that this is kind of self-perpetuating. So breaking that with like, hey, maybe try these open source alternatives seems like it would be useful, at least to the stage of, be aware these exist, and maybe do a project with these to see that they can do similar things. I don't know. It does seem like people come out of engineering school with, well, here are the 3 tools, and I have to use them, and they cost $6,000 a seat.
For sure. And then like not everyone has the time or ability to be able to take like after completing your like 4-year degree, to take another 3 months to learn the now free version of the software, So yeah, definitely. And a lot of companies have been able to really balance like their own benefits of the open source community with also their own, like you say, investment in having students have this super expensive software. Right? They're able to pick and choose what parts of our community that benefit them. And part of the goal is really just to like find ways to develop our own like robust and awesome free software that can stand up to those limitations, right?
Some of it's just being able to talk to them realistically about where the tools are. I mean, I learned MATLAB in school, and I used it professionally. And now if I reach for something, it is always NumPy. And I couldn't tell you I can tell you that NumPy of today exceeds MATLAB of the 90s.
Bold statement.
Yes, exactly. But I couldn't tell you if NumPy of today is a competitor to actual MATLAB. Knowing as an academic, if I could know that, it would help me to be able to say, I am preparing my students by having them use NumPy. KiCad, again, is one of those that for a long time, people were using it and it was good, but everybody knew it wasn't as good. And it's starting to get,
it takes time, yeah.
It's starting to get to the point where, yes, you can come out of school only having used KiCad and still be hired.
Yeah, for sure. And, some of those things too is like there are a lot of, I'm thinking specifically about like, PCB making softwares that are just as confusing.
Oh yeah.
They're all just as confusing, but like, it's sometimes just easier to go with the thing that you and that's what you have to do, right? So just having like people have the resources and like the capacity to advocate for teaching open source tools in school, and like the backing to say like you mentioned, like this is a usable real tool, and there are undeniable benefits of using open source tools.
I mean, one of the undeniable real benefits is that you can use it after college.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how many times I scrounged around for a MATLAB license.
I know. Yeah, no. Yeah.
And the company always like had 1, but we always needed like 3. So it was very exciting. Okay, so that is the summit and some about open source hardware. Let's talk about you.
Yeah, sure.
You have been researching outer space infrastructure. That is so cool. Tell me more.
Yeah, so my PhD research is about outer space. So it's basically
wait. Say that again. Yeah. Your PhD research is
about outer space.
I love the Canadian accent.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
she's been researching otters in space. Sorry, I should not tease you.
That would be really that would be a great topic.
Okay, I'm sorry. Outer space. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Basically, just like doing kind of like a historical dive onto how the first, people were entering into outer space and how we're looking towards the future now. So, if we are to have a general population in space, what does that look like? And like, how can we take these like very militarized technologies and kind of adapt them for people, for regular people who might not have any of this super training, who might like really not want to eat this like dried up gross food, who might want to have like a life that is not super efficient and, timed down to the minute. Like, what does that kind of look like? Given the history of
I thought you didn't like space stations.
Well, that's the problem. I don't. I don't think that they do a very good job of like painting an idea of a future that feels like I want to be there.
It's okay. So I've never even, I've read a lot of sci-fi and stuff, and I've never considered. The conceit is always that space is hard, and then you have to just accept that, you're going to have to be one of these tough people who can eat coffee from a bag or whatever and rock. Yeah. So considering the opposite of that it's very rare that it's written about that, hey, let's have except in the far future stuff, right? Where everything's already super advanced and people can basically live like they do on a planet in space. So that's fascinating. And I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that.
Yeah. And for me, it's a lot about from the beginning, creating spaces that acknowledge people's humanity, right? That like acknowledge that it's like totally okay to want to chill out in your space station. It's totally okay to want to do leisure activities in your space station. And if we're expecting people to do things like go to Mars or to live in, like space settlements or to spend any extended period of time in space, we have to be human about it. And that could mean a lot of things, right? That could mean everything from like leisure time to like to fitness, to like even just like considering what kinds of people we want to have in our space stations, right? Like, how do we accommodate somebody who is getting older in space, or how do we accommodate someone with varying abilities in space? These are all kind of questions that even on Earth, they're kind of just like tacked on afterward. We're just like, oh, okay, well, we'll just make it accessible, right? But if we think from the beginning, how is life in space really going to work? I think we will generally have much better outcomes.
How does knitting work in space?
Knitting?
I mean, knitting kind of depends on gravity, just a little bit. Never mind. I don't know why knitting in space was where I went first. But what I really was thinking about...
It's a great leisure activity.
Gardening. I mean, garden... If your hydroponics are beyond just food, then that's where I would spend all of my time, as long as it didn't smell bad, which I guess if it smelled bad, then it's probably not healthy and bad, and the food should not be eaten. But where am I going with this? I don't know.
Well, but I'm with you. I'm with you going this random place, because how do we like assign value to these things that like on some type of paper have no value, like growing flowers, growing plants just because of the joy of growing plants, right? And that things that create a quality of life that we want to have. How do we account for those things in this like harsh environment of space that's been like really heavily optimized in a very particular way?
Are there things beyond simply bringing, and I know what makes us human is, mostly our experience on this planet, which has a lot of things associated with it, and moving to space is none of those things are available unless we bring them with us. Are there things you've been thinking about that are unique to space that are like, oh, these are new human experiences that are not just grinding out life?
There's weightlessness.
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing that has come up a lot in my research is how people of like a whole bunch of varying abilities, so various kinds of disabled people, might really excel in this environment of outer space, whereas on Earth, like it's generally thought of that they aren't able to contribute on the same level, which is not true at all. But, like maybe this is an opportunity that we can use to like think about like, hey, like for people who don't have, who have different use of their limbs, maybe they don't have to like run on some weird gravity simulation machine for 2 hours a day. Right. And that's pretty cool. For people who can't see, like maybe we don't have to illuminate every aspect of the space station. And that's like a huge benefit. You're saving a bunch of energy. So there's all kinds of like other opportunities that allow us to reimagine the way we're thinking of like bodies in space, basically.
And so what is your day-to-day? What is your... I mean, thinking about this is neat, but it would take me about 2 days before I was starting to write a sci-fi novel.
Yeah. I mean, my research mostly involves looking. It's very the crux of it, like every PhD research, is very boring. Looking at historical documents and like understanding how we are building spaces and selecting people for outer space and what assumptions are kind of built into that. So thinking about how we can kind of like adapt those things to be different and to be to just like really imagine like a different world outside of our world.
Once again, 2 days and I'm writing a sci-fi novel.
Well, that's good. You never like doing research.
I like doing some research. I get into the research and then I'm like, oh, and then I can apply this way. And then suddenly I'm off on tangents.
Well, I've been told by my advisor more than once to stop making art and start doing the research. And it's actually been something that I was really struggling with because I come from a fine arts background and I just got really excited about this subject. And at the beginning of my PhD research, I kept trying to make art pieces and I kept trying to, write stories and do all these things. And it helped me think about it for sure. Mm-hmm. But at one point I had to just start reading the archives.
Do you find that there's a psychological desire from some people to say, no, you can't do it this way. It has to be like, the pioneers and the people on the frontier and the miners in the California gold rush and everything must be suffering. I mean, is there that attitude that is persistent among some aspects of the space? I don't know, the space thought leaders. That's a terrible word, but
like hardship is necessary to discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to do with like what our idea of efficiency is and what our idea of values are, right? So if our goal, like, you mentioned like the gold rush and all of these things, right? If our goal is to get to space to extract minerals in space, that's a different goal than to like get to space because we want to like have a cool space garden and knit things.
Yeah, I mean, if the goal is to simply make a profit, that's entirely different from, okay, we're just expanding the frontier of where people live.
Exactly. And I think those things are often obfuscated a little bit or difficult to really see at face value because it's so easy to be excited about space. Like I'm so excited about space all the time, right? So sometimes you have to dig a little bit to really see like, okay, why are we going and what do we hope to accomplish and how can we like keep those goals in mind and not get sidetracked by mining the moon or whatever.
Right.
You've said you've done some research and I can imagine there is a lot of NASA documentation, but do you also read sci-fi? Because I'm thinking about Bujol's Quadi system
Oh, people adapted to space.
People adapted to space.
I don't read as much sci-fi as I should, unfortunately. I am definitely like aware that a lot of these topics are covered by sci-fi authors in a bunch of different ways, especially, you know, like trying to imagine other worlds. There's a ton of like, you know, activists or, you know, people with like trying to understand how their identities manifest in space. And I do a lot more looking at art. So I do have a chapter of my dissertation that's just about different ways people draw space or paint space or render space. Ooh. And what that means, right? Like, how do we imagine a space station? And is it an extension of, you know, the ISS, or is it like a whole other world that maybe has other values or other ideas or other priorities?
It's probably a really unique perspective to come into this without a big sci-fi background, because you're not going to be.
People are constantly giving me recommendations.
Right.
Really,
but it's also great, right? Because you're not tainted by a bunch of people's other preconceptions or story-based kind of ideas and things. I think that's actually probably useful for your research.
Because I am so tainted.
Once you're done, I've got a list of books for you. But
yes.
Oh yeah. When I'm done reading all the documentation, you know, I'll definitely go back and watch all these things. Like I was watching For All Mankind, and I couldn't stop referencing the actual like historical events that everything was based off, that I feel like most people who are watching the show probably don't pick up on like every little thing. But because I've done so much research into outer space, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like an offshoot of that document. This is an offshoot of this meeting, you know? So that was really, really, really cool to have that perspective while watching For All Mankind. But in terms of sci-fi, I definitely, as soon as I'm done my dissertation, I'm just gonna like sit down and like get caught up on the last like 50 years.
It is too. I mean, because some of the older stuff is weird and future, and yet closer than it was then. And yeah, sorry, Chris and I are both reading Werner Vinge, and it's just weird. So weird. Okay, so another thing you work on are zines, which are like magazines, but without. I don't know where I'm going. That didn't work at all. Tell me about your zines. Let's just go with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I just love zine culture. So for anyone who doesn't know zine,
I don't understand zine culture.
It's been around a really long time, so it's time for you to.
I know, but I don't get it.
They're little self-published magazines.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a cool way to share stuff you're excited about.
Imagine the internet didn't exist.
Yeah, because
it's a web page that you hand someone. Okay. Sorry, Lee.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. It's like your GeoCities page, you know, like you can make it about whatever you want, and you could make it with whatever kind of weird graphics you want. But like it really comes out of like, you know, like photocopy culture, like when photocopy machines became accessible and popular, and the tools that people had were to photocopy stuff and to mail it out to their friends. And, you know, yeah, again, like a lot of the internet just, I don't want to say stop that, but changed it, you know? So now I could post on Instagram and make a reel. It's kind of like making a zine. It's something I'm excited about. I want to share with people. But I started doing it because I have an education that is like fine arts, and I learned electronics through mostly experimentation or a series of like super weird art teachers who also didn't really know, but they were like, I don't know, I just kind of do it this way and it works. So I felt at one point like I was missing a lot of information that I felt like everyone around me kind of already knew. So the example I like to give was like, I remember the first time I like stripped a wire, and it was like a strand core wire. This is like a million years ago. It was a strand core, and I'd never seen that before. I'd only ever seen like solid core breadboard wires. And I was like, what is going on? I was like so confused. And I felt like everyone around me already knew this. They were like, look, there's just different kinds of wire in your wire. And there was like a ton of things like that, you know, like little things where I was like, oh, like, why doesn't this LED work? And this one does. Like, what's the deal with this button? I press it once and this one I have to hold it down. Like all those little things that like sometimes people don't sit you down and tell you. So I started making a series of 3 zines at first. One is an instructive appreciation of buttons and switches. One is all about wire. And the other is LED love. And these are 3 topics that I feel like people just kind of zoom past when you're learning. And it just goes into detail about like all of the little things that you might not know, maybe things that no one told you.
It's a good idea. You have a new one coming out.
Yeah. So a topic that I feel like has kind of plagued artists, I would say, for the longest time is Ohm's law. So very simple on the surface. I feel like people tell you, they're like, okay, you know, like here are like the 3 little equations, you multiply, divide, whatever. But then in application, I have seen a lot of people be very confused, especially when circuits start to get more advanced or, you know, like trying to get past that basic level. And I was trying to figure out whether it was like that I was missing some core facts when I was learning, or whether I understood more than I thought I did and nothing was actually confusing at all, or, you know, whether there was like more to it. So I wrote the zine, and it basically just covers like how electricity works and how to use Ohm's law in like a way that you're actually going to be using it if you're like building simple circuits. And like to really like explain the relationship between like voltage, current, and resistance. So it really takes people step by step and just like explains those 3 forces, which again, like I know it's like pretty level 1 stuff, but I think I see a lot of people at very different levels of electronics misunderstand or get it wrong. So yeah, I'm super excited about it because it's a topic that like always low key made me feel like I didn't belong, because it was like a level 1 thing that I felt like I didn't have 100% grasp on. Even though I felt like I understood every phase, I was like, somehow this doesn't add up to me.
That happens to me a lot. Yes, I understand all of this. I can solve the problems, but I don't understand it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's called Ohm No. And yeah, I'm excited.
Did it turn out that you do mostly understand it?
Yeah, it turns out that I definitely understand. And the thing that that I feel like was most confusing is that people have these like kind of canned ways of explaining Ohm's law. They just repeat them.
And then the resistance is a sponge.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
How in the world is that?
No, it's a pipe. It's constricted.
It's a pipe. Yeah.
Oh, is it the inductor that's the sponge? Something's a sponge that just... Never mind. Okay.
I think the water analogy breaks down with either inductors or it's the capacitor's a sponge. No.
Well, I feel like the water is like a really funny one, because it's like thinking about water in the way that you're prompted to when you're being explained, like, oh, the height of the pipe, or like I'm like, I've never thought about water like this. Like, why are you explaining it to me like this?
Thanks a lot. Take me back and explain water first.
Yeah.
Does it say plumber on my shirt? Because it shouldn't.
Yeah, I got a D in the course that tried to teach me about water as electronics. So.
And then he had to go back and get a whole degree about it.
No, that was STEM.
Oh.
I didn't go back and get that degree. Although I did take graduate STEM after that, but that was different. Yes, Ohm's law vexes me forever, even though it's very simple. Once you try to apply it, everybody explains it in just random ways. So I'm going to read that. Maybe it'll fix me.
Yeah, I tried to, as I was writing it, I tried to like just basically go through every like canned phrase that people say and just try to really understand what they mean by it, and break them all down and say it in a different way. So every in the whole zine, it's about 20 pages with a lot of big pictures. You know, like it really just tries to like take you from like, what exactly is happening? What do these forces really mean? And like, what are the next steps that build on top of each other without using any of these like, you know, prefab explanations?
I know the answer is going to be no, but it is a book I like a lot. Have you read Electronics for Earthlings?
No, but that sounds great.
It has a similar goal in that it definitely does not use the water analogy. And
Cool.
it was very helpful to me when I was in the position of, oh yeah, I can solve these equations, but I can't apply it to this circuit.
Mm-hmm. I will definitely check that out. That sounds great.
Where do we get your zine? How do we get your zine?
You could get my zines on my website, which is lesibe.org.
That's Lima, Echo, Echo, Charlie, Yankee, and Bravo.org.
I always got to show that off.
I know. Do you know how hard I spent? Look, I probably can do some of it in Morse. Let's see.
No. We're not doing that now.
Lee, it's been really good to talk to you. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Thank you so much. I really love to cover this huge array of topics. We went everywhere from open source to outer space to zines. So, yeah, this has been great.
Our guest has been Lee Wilkins, a cyborg artist and educator currently based in Montreal. They are the Summit Chair and board member of the Open Source Hardware Association.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you to Christopher for producing and co-hosting. Thank you for listening. You can always contact us at show@embedded.fm or at the contact link on Embedded FM. And now a quote to leave you with. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in. It's from Alan Alda.